Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be discussing WebForms. So as everyone knows, this is our new platform as of January 2020. So I have him here with me as well, joining me on the webinar, and he's going to be walking us through. Please drop your questions. Let us know, what has been working for you, what hasn't, and as we go along, we'll show you how to tweak things if necessary. So Mahir, welcome, and thank you for joining me on today's webinar.
Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. Yes, we have a new platform. It's called WebForms 2019. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about it. I just sort of want to discuss today what we use WebForms 2019 for and how it's different from Authentisign. Just sort of a brief overview. WebForms is used for creation of transactions, management of transactions, for signing, and also for final submission of documents. And we're going to be covering all four of those topics today in detail. My goal is to really sort of do the step-by-step in this sort of webinar. And we'll also have this webinar recorded just so that, when you do write a transaction, maybe you can refer back to it. Supplementary to this webinar, we have YouTube videos, which are about 5 minutes in length max, that walk you through basic steps of how to write transactions or submit documents. And there's also a step-by-step manual, which I believe was posted on the training channel yesterday. Is that right, Jane?
Okay, yeah, so is it in Workplace then?
Yeah, it's in Workplace, I believe. That's right.
Great, yeah, I'll double check that.
Okay, great.
And
Yeah.
where are the YouTube videos? Where can people find those?
So the YouTube videos are on the GM YouTube channel. They're also linked in this training document that I mentioned. And maybe after this training session is done, we can throw everything on the training channel on Workplace.
Great.
Okay, great. So should I get started now? Are we at enough participants?
For sure. Yeah, we've got a good group of people. So yeah, let's jump right in.
Awesome. Okay. So the first step in getting to WebForms is logging into the Toronto Real Estate Board website. As you may be aware, they did update their homepage recently. So a lot of things have moved. It makes things better in some ways and worse in others because for whatever reason, the Toronto MLS, the Toronto Real Estate Board, I should mention, they want to promote the use of Authentisign from start to finish. And it doesn't work well for our use case. We want to hop into WebForms. So I know it's really tempting. There's a big button right here that says Authentisign. Basically, what you want to do is ignore this entirely. Over here, there's a button that says MLS Services. You want to click on this. And in this column, which is the middle column at the very bottom, it says WebForms. This is where you want to click. It's quite a tedious process to get here, so I'll tell you what to do. Once you're signed in, okay, so once this completes loading, you'll be at this URL, which is pr.transactiondesk.com, and you're logged in. What you want to do is bookmark this page, throw it on your bookmarks bar like you can see for me. I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's bookmarked as the second item over here. So have that handy, and what you can do is anytime you want to create a new transaction, click your bookmark, and you'll be right where you need to be. So actually, I'm in the broker dashboard for Transaction Desk. This is something to keep note of, that if you do need help, your GM does have access to your transactions. So if there's a specific question that you do have about a particular transaction, what you can do is let your GM know, hey, look, I'm working on this transaction for, let's say, 59 Eagle Trace in Brampton. I have a couple of questions about the clauses that I'm inserting or something along those lines. Your GM can hop into the transaction. They can read through the clauses that are there, and they can probably help you out with any custom clauses that you may need to enter, just as an FYI, okay? So I'm gonna choose a random agent here. Let me think, let me just hop in as Just Meet because I was working on something for him earlier today. Okay, so This is what your homepage should look like. Okay, so it should say member dashboard. It should show your transactions, your forms that you're working on within the transactions, and any tasks. We'll go into detail about what tasks exactly are, but right now I want you to focus on the bread and butter, which is the creation of transactions. We've tried to make this as easy as possible. If you click right here, either on the Create Transactions text or the plus home button over here, you will get the Create Transaction menu. Two mandatory steps, I should say, are the name and the template type used to create a transaction. So in this case, I'm just going to use test lease as the name. You can name this something like client name, possibly, along with property address. Okay, so this should be, if you were to organize your transactions, this is the protocol that you should use: client name, property address, so that it makes it easy for both admin staff and for yourself to remember what exactly is going on with this transaction. Under templates, if you click on this, you will see the host of templates that are available to you. So we have templates that are for residential and templates that are for commercial. For the majority of agents, you will be sticking to the residential side, okay? And if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you're using the proper template for your particular transaction type. So we have listings and we have offers. So offers would be for, in this case, purchase, and in this case, lease. We are making a test lease. So let's select the Zillow Residential Offer Lease. The reason I choose this one is because it's probably the one that most agents will use most of the time. Not sure if you noticed, but since we chose the template, your role, meaning add me as the, was automatically populated as cooperating salesperson. Let me demonstrate. If I'm switching to listing, this thing should automatically go to listing, but it didn't. Let's stick to the offer lease, and it switched back to cooperating salesperson. Great. One of the things I recommend all agents to do in this section, use Wizard. I want you to uncheck this. And I always get the question of why. The biggest issue with the Wizard is, one, it asks you questions that are not relevant to your particular transaction. So for example, if you have a lease, you're not quite worried about which direction the property is fronting on. It's not part of the transaction or any of the documents that you use. So, you know, one of the information asked is irrelevant to the transaction. And two, in personal experience, the information entered through the Wizard doesn't always populate correctly into the forms. So what I mean by that is, you know, I've seen before that address information populates incorrectly in some forms. So what we need you to do is uncheck use Wizard and input any missing information directly into the forms. We'll get to that step, and I'll explain why it's easy to do when you're in the forms. One thing I briefly skipped over is import data. I'm not going to be using it in this example, but I definitely recommend that you do try to use this feature. Some of you who were using WEBForms quite extensively in the past, meaning this version, WEBForms 2019, may be familiar with the fact that there were some issues with this feature when it came to importing address information. Lone Wolf, who is the creator of this program, really tediously has been working in 2020 to fix those issues. And just yesterday, they rolled out this new feature. So if you have, you may not have noticed, but instead of just saying Toronto, it now says Toronto Real Estate Board, which really helps. They actually are now breaking down the property type as well. So they're differentiating between freehold and condo properties. And finally, they want the MLS number. So when you do input this information, what it's grabbing from MLS is the property address, the seller name, the listing agent, and the listing agent's information, office information. It's a really handy feature. It does populate the information correctly now that they've updated the system. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to leave it blank. And I just want to show you why I need to do that, okay? So I'm going to hit create. Once again, this is the test lease. All of the options have been selected. You go create. Okay, so this is the first page that populates when you create a new transaction. It's the details page. And in the details page, you will have the overview of all the property information that is relevant to this transaction. So if you were to pull this information, this address information would be fully populated with address information. If you are, like I have here, working with a blank document, I want you to only use this section for address information. And that's because a lot of this information is irrelevant. Like you'll see legal description. When it comes to leases, not required. Assessment roll number, not required. So for this section, only focus on address information, okay? Let's grab a random property from Zolo. Let's go to Toronto. We're looking for lease, for lease. Home type, let's look at condo, save search. Oh, sorry, there we go. Let's use this one out in Mimico. Okay, so 10 Park Lawn Road, unit 2109. We'll hop back in. Street number 10 Park Lawn Drive. Unit number 2109. City is Toronto, Ontario. Oh, it's only asking for first two digits of the postal code or the province. Postal code. Do we have that information yet? No, we don't. You can grab that from MLS if you do choose to input that. I'm going to make one up. That's it. That's all the information you want to enter when you're starting out with the residential transaction. You want to click on this button to save this. Okay. And now you want to jump directly into the forms. So we're in forms. Because we chose the lease template, all of the forms required for this particular transaction have been populated for us. So, you don't have to individually choose forms for particular transactions. If you choose the template that's correct to the transaction, everything is populated for you. This also includes standard clauses. So I'm going to hop in here just because we're on the topic. You can see because we entered the address information is all populated in this form. But also, if I scroll down to Schedule A, standard lease Schedule A clauses are entered here. Okay, so you don't have to worry too much about what clauses to enter if you're, let's say, new to the business, or maybe even just creating a transaction that is time sensitive. You have the minimum standard clauses required to safely submit an offer already populated for you. Okay. I'm going to hop back out into the forms section because there's something I want to show you, which is the order in which we want you to fill in the forms. Okay. So when it comes to a transaction, start with the confirmation of co-op. And I'll explain why that's important. Okay. So we have a tenant. We're going to enter tenant name here, tenant 2. So in this case, we're going to have 2 test tenants in this transaction. I've entered their names as buyer in this case. I'm going to go through, select some dummy information for this transaction. Okay. And you'll see that your information, meaning the cooperating brokerage information, is auto-populated. So in this case, I'm working as Jasmeet, so his name is chosen here. Okay. What I'm going to do is for every form page, there's a top menu. So in this top menu, you have options like save. You can save the forms as PDF. Print if required. Okay, so we do suggest e-signature, but that's not always a possibility. But most importantly, there's this button up here called Transaction Forms. So if you click this, you can move between forms quite easily. You don't have to go back to the forms page. In this case, I'm in confirmation of co-op and I want to move to agreement to lease. So I'm going to click that. And what you're going to notice is that the tenant information that we entered in confirmation of co-op is now populated in agreement to lease. So what the system does is it's aware of what information is similar between two forms, and it will populate that information within the forms, within the transaction forms. So basically, when you're creating these documents, it's just a game of fill in the blanks. Let's go through and we'll fill in some dummy information for this as well. We're going to date this transaction today. Landlord information you can grab from the MLS. So what we'll do is let's fill this in now. On the Zola listing, you can just grab the MLS number and you can hop into Toronto Real Estate Board. Go to search property, which is not working. There we go. And in this section, just pop in the MLS number and you get the full broker full listing. So we have the seller names here. We're just going to copy and paste. Try to make everything very pretty. Of course, address of landlord is not something we have information to. The term of the lease. So let's hop back over here. Term should be 1 year. Let's work with that. Most likely, if you are writing an offer today, it will be for sometime in mid-March. So let's say starting on the 14th. And this property was listed for $2,800 in Mimico for a 2+1 bedroom. That's a pretty good deal. Let's go ahead and full ask. Okay, so you'll notice 2,800 and the text is auto-populated. We'll go with the 14th because we're starting on the 14th for the lease. The tenant pays upon acceptance 2 months rent. So that works out to $3,600. That's first and last month's rent. Just as an example, there are certain cases where you will be placing more than 2 months deposit. In that case, what you can do here is you can go first and last 5 if the scenario was you're placing 6 months rent as deposit. And of course, you'd have to change this number to correspond. But in this case, we're just doing 2 months. So I'm just going to go first and last. The check will always be payable to the listing brokerage. So let's grab that. They're Living Realty. Okay. Premises to be only used for single family condo residential. Try to be as detailed and as specific as possible when it comes to things like premises to be only used for. Services and costs, of course, in this scenario, you want to check in the listing what is being paid for by the maintenance fees. So in this case, water is included. That means the landlord pays the water, but hydro is not included, meaning the tenant has to pay for hydro, okay? So hydro being electricity is being paid by the tenant. Water is being paid for by the landlord. Heat is included. So once again, we'll say landlord. And hot water rental, in this case, nothing is mentioned. In certain scenarios where you do not have that information or the information is not relevant. So in this case, oil is not relevant to this property. You can leave those blank. You don't have to mandatorily select who pays this. Okay. Cable TV, not included. Cable TV is not included. So tenant pays that if required. Condo fees is always paid by landlord. Garbage removal, we get a lot of questions about this. In this case, garbage removal is referenced as a property tax item. Property tax is once again paid for by the landlord. So we will say landlord will pay for garbage removal. Okay. There are sections for other, these are custom clauses, custom sections. So when it comes to leases, what you can input here is snow removal or lawn care, whatever applies to this particular property, and then assign that to whoever's paying. Okay. Parking, let's take a quick look. There's one underground parking spot. What I like to do, this is something that I have learned the hard way, unfortunately, is exclusive use of one underground parking space. Why that's important is if you put this in now, the landlord won't come back and say, oh, by the way, I need the garage to store all the furniture that I have in the house or something along those lines. So try to keep it exclusive. Additional terms, this is great for if you have any locker information. In this section, it's asking you how many schedules are attached. Schedules are always usually attached to the MLS listing. So you can see there's a schedule here. I'm just going to click on this so I can see if it is actually a schedule. It is. This is a schedule B. Oh, in this case, this is a schedule A. So the landlord is asking for us to use their schedule A, which is interesting. You don't see this too often anymore, but they do require some certain clauses. So some certain custom clauses. I'm going to save this one for later because I'm going to show you how we can easily populate external schedules within a signing. We don't necessarily have to add them now. So you wouldn't have to, let's say, copy and paste this information. Let's just keep it a schedule A. Irrevocable, usually we give 24 business hours for irrevocable. Why that's the case is if it comes to income verification, income verification can only be done during business hours. It's really tough to submit an offer over a weekend or on a Friday night and expect it to be accepted over the weekend. I mean, to give 24 hours on the weekend is tough. If the listing agent is doing their due diligence, then they will ask for 24 business hours. So in this case, we are on a Thursday. Let's say we're at 11:27. So let's say 9 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. That should be more than enough time. Okay, so in this case, hour, meaning this agent's email address and fax number were auto-populated. But if you ever do have to manually grab this information, I'll show you how. On the MLS listing, if you click on the broker's name or the agent's name, you will get their particular information. So in this case, here is the agent's email address. Here is their phone and fax number. So, you know, even when you're speaking over the phone with an agent, you don't have to tell them, hey, look, can you text me your email address so I can email you the offer? You can just grab it from MLS. You can verbally say, you know, is the email address you have on MLS the one that you'd like me to send the offer to? There you go. Okay, scrolling through the rest of the agreement to lease, everything looks good. We'll get to the acknowledgement during the signing section. But as you can see, it is populated with our Schedule A. For this example, I'm going to keep it that way. I'm not going to include the listing agent Schedule A just yet. We can, once again, click on transaction forms and hop into the next form. So in this case, offer summary. These three forms, confirmation of co-op, agreement to lease, and 801, are what I refer to as transaction forms, okay? So if you are submitting an offer to a listing agent, only include these three forms. Working with a realtor and tenant rep agreement are what we call agency forms. So they're internal forms that we use within our side of the brokerage transaction. They also do not require any signing or signature by the listing side. So, you know, you don't have to include them. The last one, of course, is rental application. I do have a solution for rental application that I use outside of WEBForms. It's a self-serve solution, and if I do have time at the end, I will cover it. If not, I can make a separate YouTube video and I'll get Jane to post it on training. But let's hop over into 801. Okay, so we're in 801. All we have to populate is how we submit the offer. So in 99% of the cases, we are submitting by email to the listing brokerage. It's kind of hard to judge timing about when your clients will sign, but give them at least 1.5 hours. So we're 11:30, let's say around 1 o'clock p.m. today. And irrevocable, of course, until 9 o'clock a.m. Sorry, yeah, a.m.? A.m., yeah, it was a.m. Tomorrow. This information here, irrevocable until. One of the situations that happens a lot is you submit an offer and the listing agent will say, look, I need more time with the offer. The landlord is in China. The landlord is in Iran. They're overseas. So give me 48 hours. But you've already written this offer. So we'll go over easy ways to extend an offer's timing. Okay. So I am happy with all of the transaction documents. Let's hop over briefly into the agency documents as well. You're just going to double check the information. So in this case, it is asking for address of tenant. Just to be perfectly clear, this is not the address that we're applying for lease. It is the tenant's current address. Okay. So ask for some photo ID because you're going to have to include it in the full package to the listing agent anyway for a lease, or collect it in the cases of a purchase or sale for FinTrack. So we're setting the times now for when the commencement of this agency agreement starts. In this case, we're going to start it today and expiring. Usually for leases, about 1.5 to 2 months is enough time. You know, not every lease submitted will be accepted. So give yourself a good buffer space there. Let's go with, what are we at today? The 6th of Feb. So we'll go with the 6th day of March, 2020. That gives me 1 month. Property type, condo, apartment. And geographic location. Now, if you've been for a training with the Toronto Real Estate Board on writing offers using Authentic Sign, this is an area they really like to focus on. Geographic location, when you're writing a tenant rep agreement or a buyer rep agreement, are two very crucial items. To be legally enforceable, they cannot be sort of general regions. So I can't say, for example, York region. You have to specifically state within York region which cities this tenant representation applies to. In this particular case, this property is out in Toronto. So I'm going to say Toronto, specifically Mimico. You can actually place for geographic location. Okay, you can get this down to this specific property address. So if you were to say to your client, look, you know, we may not work past this transaction. For now, I'm only going to hold you to writing an offer for this particular address, 10 Park Lawn Road, unit 2109. You can definitely just put that address and only have this tenant rep apply to that property for this client. Okay. When you do have hesitant tenants who do not necessarily want to sign tenant representation agreements, to protect everyone's interests, it's always good to at least get them to sign for the particular address that they will be submitting an offer for. Okay, so in this case, it's asking for a minimum commission. Remember, this commission is only paid by the listing side, meaning the landlord is paying you commission. It's a disclosure in this section to your client, which in this case would be the tenant, that you are being paid. Okay. So we are not being paid any major commission for sale of property. In this case, we would just write 1/2 month's rent plus HST. Or commission of, it's asking you percentage. You can just place NA, not applicable, or not applicable. The tenant agrees to pay the brokerage such commission if the tenant enters into an agreement within blank days after the expiration of this agreement. So this is the holdover period. Holdover period is totally up to you as to how long you want to hold this client for this property. So, I mean, 30 days is acceptable. Even 0 days is acceptable. So I'm going to put 30 days here. I'm going to keep going through this. We're good, I think, with inputting information. Unless I missed something, no schedules is fine. So let's hop over into the signing section now. We've created our transaction. We're happy with everything. We're ready to send it out for signing. What's the quickest way to do this? Beside every form name, there are these circles. You can just select in bulk the forms you would like to send out for signing. So in this case, I'm actually going to send out 5 forms for signing. I'm doing this for a very particular reason. I will explain why. Usually, when it comes to staying organized, you want to have separate signings for your agency documents. So 810, 346, those 2 you want separate signings for, and the transaction documents. So 320, 400, and 801. Just to walk you through the process, when you send something out for signing, you as the agent will receive updates every time someone opens the document for signing and completes the signing. At the end, when everyone has signed a transaction, you will get an email called Final Revision with your transaction name. Final Revision will have links to individual signed documents and also all signed documents as one big PDF. So when you're sending this package to the listing agent, it's good to have that fine-grained control over which documents you're sending. So we've selected 5. You can confirm that by seeing the basket up here that says the number 5. And then what you want to do is click the basket, and you want to click this pen. This pen is send to Authentisign, okay? These are bulk actions for all of these transaction forms. So in this case, we are sending to Authentisign, like I mentioned. Let it load up. Here is the 4-step process for Authentisign, okay? We have the signing name. This is a mandatory field. Signing name is something that will show up as the subject line in the email that your clients will receive, which is why it's important to have things like client name, property address as the name for the transaction. You have 2 options in terms of participant order. Sign in line. Sign in line means one person receives this offer at a time, and the next person will not receive it to sign until the first person is finished. There are very limited cases that I can recommend using sign in line for. For 90% of the cases that you'll be signing, I want you to choose simul sign, and I'll explain why that's important. When it comes to signing a document, it's a very time-sensitive process. So when you click simul sign, all participants in this transaction will receive the signing documents at exactly the same time. Everyone can review and everyone can sign at exactly the same time. Overall, the process is a lot quicker. So make sure that simul sign is selected in this case. Don't worry too much about advanced options. This is stuff about expiry dates, things like that. Oh, give me a sec. Someone's calling me. There we go. You want to jump directly when you selected signing name and participant order into step 2, participants. So participants gives you a whole bunch of information here. In this case, these 2 people are the sellers or the landlords. When it comes to selecting people involved in a signing, you only want to select the parties on your side of the transaction. So in this case, Justmeet is the cooperating broker. We have the 2 tenants as well. We are only going to choose Justmeet, tenant 1 and tenant 2. For everyone involved, select remote signer. Remote signer sends all of the documents as emails that your clients or yourself can review, okay? You also have the option of being a reviewer. In-person signer, I do not recommend using. For all signatures, send remote signer. Okay, 1, 2, 3. We are good to go. Everyone is selected as remote signer. I'm going to add everyone. So you will see names and you will see roles. And I'll explain why this is important. You will also see in certain instances this hand over the pen. Okay? What exactly that means is that this particular person is missing some information. So participant is missing required information. So tenant name, we're missing definitely the email, which is a red mandatory field. But another mandatory field, which for some reason they do not mention, is a custom initial. So let's start with that, TN, and I'm just going to use a test email. Okay. And you want to make sure that the role is selected correctly as well. In this case, they're selected as buyer. I'm going to change that to tenant. Let me see if it saves. Great, everything worked. It's asking me, do I want to change anything? I'm just going to go save right now. Don't worry about this. And once again, for tenant 2, we're missing information. So tenant 2, just a test email. Their role, I'm selecting as tenant, and their custom initials, I'm selecting over here. Okay, I'm just going to go save participant. We're going to get that same menu, just go save. It's fine. So just review, make sure that the names are correct for the people signing and the roles are correct for the people signing. And you'll understand why when I click step 3. So step 3 is the document step, okay? For the forms we've imported, you'll notice that there are 2 particular, let's say, icons that they're using. Anything that has this particular icon, which shows signing and initial fields, do I have a question here? Is PIN mandatory? PIN. Could you be more specific on that? PIN where? Should we answer questions now or should we wait till the end? Let's take a look here.
Until the end. I'm just wondering if maybe this was shown on the previous screen and maybe that's why the question is being asked, but I didn't see anything that said PIN.
Yes, in the participants for the tenants, is PIN mandatory? So the question is PIN mandatory? I think I know what you mean. In this case, if you go in-person signer, which is why I told you not to use in-person signer if possible, it does ask for signing host PIN. What this means is you're supposed to give this person a custom PIN. So 5656, let's say, just as an example. And you're supposed to give this PIN to the person either by text message or through some other means. I do not recommend using in-person signer for any case. Always use remote signer, so you'll never have that issue with PIN.
Oh, I see. So signing PIN next to the role is also visible under the remote signer, but it doesn't look like it's a mandatory field.
Yes. Signing PIN here, you mean, right? Yeah, not a mandatory field. I don't recommend using it. It will just make things tricky. There's no legal requirements to use this section.
Okay, great. So I think that answers that.
Right. Look, guys, one thing I want to point out is the process of signing e-signature through e-signature is new to a lot of people, especially if you have clients who are in the older demographic, okay? You want to make this process as easy for them as possible. And sometimes with some clients, even asking them to open an email is a challenge. Asking them to click on buttons is a challenge. So don't throw too many barriers into finishing the signing. The entire process is sort of streamlined and tracked by the system, okay? I do see a question here about clauses. I'm going to hold on to that question. We will go back and I will explain how to insert clauses, okay? So let's keep going. Step 3. There was 2 differences I was explaining, which is the difference in icon. If you see this particular icon with the yellow boxes, what that means is it's auto-populating fields for signature and initial in this particular form, but it's not doing that in this particular form. Why? I got to throw my hands up in the air on this one. I have no idea. We've been bugging WEBForms to fix this issue since the beginning of the year. It doesn't seem to be a priority for them. In 2019, every single form populated signature and initial fields correctly. For some reason, it's no longer doing that. And I guess it's on the checklist for them to fix, but they have too many other major issues to fix right now. This section, Step 3 Documents, is a great place to insert any extra schedules that you may have. So you can just click on Add and upload a file. So what you would be required to do is download any Schedule B that you may be required to use. So this, I believe, is a Schedule B. This is a Schedule C. This is a Schedule B from another transaction. But just to give you an example, there it is uploading a Schedule B into the transaction. And if you scroll to the right-hand side, you can see the Schedule B has been added to this transaction, okay? So in the design step, I will explain how you can add fields to a form that you're adding to this transaction. This is a design step. All of the forms are populated as one big PDF, okay? You can scroll all the way through the document, make sure that everything that you require has been imported correctly. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and show you this custom Schedule B that I imported into this transaction, okay? Let's start from the top. You always want to start from the first page, and what you want to do is on the right-hand side, you want to make sure that you have the correct signer chosen. So in this case, we're missing initials, as you can see, in confirmation of co-op for buyer. So let's select the tenants, and we want to place initials. So we click on drag and drop. Drag and drop gives you a whole host of options here of what you can place. Anything that's red is a mandatory field that your client will have to initial or sign. Anything that's green is an optional item, pardon me. So far, I haven't been able to find any reason for using an optional item. So I always recommend choose the mandatory signing field so your clients don't miss anything. And just like it mentions, drag and drop. We have 2 tenants, so I'm going to switch to tenant 2. I'm going to drag and drop the initial here. Okay. Wow, we are running short on time here. I think I took a little bit too long. Let's drag and drop some signatures. So just really simple, drag and drop. This particular one, I should mention, drag and drop is date. So you can drag and drop that here. Scrolling down to the rest of the document. Do we have a question here? Sorry, I couldn't quite see that one. I think I got a message, but I can't see what it said. Okay, so pretty self-explanatory about how the drag and drop fields work. There's one particular item I want to highlight here, which is, let's say you're submitting this offer and all of a sudden things, the listing agent calls you and says, you know what, I need 48 hours for this particular transaction. You're already at the point where you've created this form. You're deep into the signing design phase, so you don't necessarily want to start from scratch. What you can use are these markup tools. Okay, this is great on even if you'd like to remove, let's say, a clause. But in this case, I'm just going to be changing this irrevocable date from the 7th to the 8th. So I'm going to select markup. I'm going to select the line. I'm going to click and drag over the 7 to cross out the 7. And then I'm going to select the text field. I'm going to drag and drop a text box here, and I'm going to put 8 instead of 7. And just to initial the changes, I'm going to place the initial fields for these particular clients. Okay, Q&A. Let me just, should you not be including Residential Tenancies Act? You can. that is absolutely a possibility. You can add that as I mentioned on the add form section on step 3. It's not mandatory when it comes to placing an offer. I would say when it comes to RTAs, you only want to do RTAs when it comes to an accepted offer. And Jane, maybe you can pipe in and with your experience, tell me if that's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. The residential tenancy agreement basically reiterates the accepted terms. So my recommendation is to wait until you have the accepted offer. So you're not completing that document prematurely and you're not having to revise it. It's not something else that you need to work on. So I would wait until the offer is accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. To be perfectly honest with you, anything that is not a form is an absolute pain to populate currently. The RTA, it's available in 2 different formats, which are the editable formats and the static formats. And to populate those documents right now, it's still a bit of a challenge. So don't waste your time if you do not have an accepted offer in that case. I'm just going to take a drink of water. Give me 1 sec.
Sure. And do we have the Schedule B that you had saved from the MLS, that part of our transaction kit at this point?
We do. It's all the way at the bottom. Why don't I skip directly to that right now?
Sure.
So when you do import other documents, like the Schedule B, it's really easy to populate this with information. So what you can do is drag and drop just signer names in this case. Okay, so tenant 2, tenant 1, and let's say this information was not included, like landlord name was not included. You can use the text field. Oops, give me 1 sec. Text field over here, and you can input this information yourself. Sorry, so I assigned this to the wrong person. Let's assign this to Jasmeet. And what'll happen is when this is either sent to Jasmeet, he can fill it out manually, or you can use the markup section. And sorry, getting a little bit of trouble with my trackpad here. Text, click and drag like this, and you can manually input information here. So this is how you can populate forms imported during the add a form section of step 3. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily fill out all the sections in this particular example, but you get the general idea of what's possible with the signing software. When you're happy with everything, when everything has been filled, what you can do is you can just click next. That will complete the signing process and you can send invitations, okay? There is a signing dashboard for every single transaction. So this is, let's just, actually, you know what should I do this? Yeah, okay, let's do this. If I go to the dashboard, this is your home page, and you want to check on the signing. What you can do is hop into the transaction, and on the right-hand side, click on signings. If you click on the first signing, you should be able to see the statuses for all participants in the transaction. So in this case, the email has not yet been sent out, but you can edit email addresses here. You can resend emails if anyone missed their signing email by clicking the envelope. And you can also copy transactions if required. Use cases for this would be something like you missed adding a form to a transaction. So you just click copy. It will copy all participants, all current documents in this transaction, and it will take you back to step 1 of creating the signing. So the question was, where can we find pre-printed Schedule A's? I'm assuming that question is regarding the clauses. If that's the case, in WEBForms, if you use the offer lease template, all of the clauses are auto-populated. Okay, so we have, it's 11:54. I think this one was supposed to go for an hour.
That's right.
Really quickly going to show you, when you get the hang of this this step-by-step process, how easy it is to create a transaction quite quickly. Okay, so I'm going to start from scratch again. We're going to use the same property, And I'm going to work at my pace and show you how quickly I can write this offer accurately. And the property address was, in this case, sorry, I'm not able to see it. Let's take a look. 10 Park Lawn Road, right? Test lease 10 Park Lawn Road. Template, we're using Zolo Residential Offer Lease. Select source, we're choosing the Toronto Real Estate Board. We have the MLS number. We know it's a condo property, so input the MLS number. Make sure you're selected as a cooperating salesperson. Uncheck Use Wizard. Click Create. So because we use the MLS import feature, the seller name's already populated, the address is already populated, and the price is already populated as well in list price, okay? Once we're happy with the details page, we can hop over to forms, hop into confirmation of co-op, populate it with our tenant names. Input the dummy information in this case. So when I say dummy information, this is just what information you should be inputting if you have a standard lease. Okay. Make sure that all information is populated. So this is the other feature of the MLS import. It populated the information for the listing agent. Use the top menu. We're going to hop over to agreement to lease. And then we can start inputting other information that's required. So remember, tenant information was populated from a confirmation of co-op. Commencing on the 14th for 2,800. It is upon acceptance. We will place a deposit of $3,600 to Living Realty. Okay. I absolutely encourage you to copy and paste information from the MLS listing. Copying and pasting reduces on the amount of errors that you could do by manually inputting. Premises to be used for a single family apartment. We know that heat is included, but electricity is not. Hot water rental is not necessarily something that applies. Water is also included. Cable TVs for the tenant. Condo fees are by the landlord. Garbage removal is by the landlord. Parking, exclusive use of one underground parking. Any lockers included? You can definitely check the listing on that. So lockers, do we see that? No lockers. Oh, there's one owned, looks like. Okay, so one locker is included in this. And you can put the legal description of the locker as well. Locker unit 9 with no level. Okay, that's fine. We'll get the information from the listing agent. Irrevocable by the tenant until 9 a.m. We have one question, couple of questions. You need to add Schedule B.
We've addressed that one. I think the question was about first and last month's rent. I think we had put in 3,600, but
Yep.
yes, it's 2,800. If that's the lease amount, then you're looking at 5,600 for the deposit.
Sorry, 5,600, my mistake. Where were we? Irrevocable by the tenant until tomorrow. Okay. And we are happy with the Schedule A because we're using our personal Schedule A. And we are just going to hop into 801. Make sure that the offer is submitted by email to the listing brokerage at around 1:00 p.m. today. And it's irrevocable until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. And boom, we are done with all of the transaction documents. That took me roughly 6 minutes. When you get comfortable, of course, speed is great, but accuracy is the most important part when creating any transaction. Don't be afraid if it's taking you about an hour to create a transaction. For the first, let's say, 5 or 6 transactions, it's okay to take your time, get everything correct, make sure that you are, inputting the information correctly. Okay.
Great. We have a great question here from Fatima. So now you've gone through this example, is it possible to delete this transaction kit, or do they stay there forever? Yes.
Yeah. What the issue was is we found that agents were deleting firm transactions. That was bad for the brokerage because we are using, as a brokerage, WEBForms as our storage for all transactions. Okay. So we removed the ability for agents to delete transactions because of that reason. You can archive a transaction. My particular preference, if you are working on a transaction and you maybe have chosen the wrong template or something like that, you can change the name up top. Just say ignore a wrong transaction used, right? And you just hit save. And now on your transaction kits, you have one more transaction kit that you've just said ignore to, okay? Don't worry too much about deleting transaction kits, and don't worry about storage space either. We have unlimited storage space.
Perfect. So one of the things that I wanted to just quickly address before we are out of time here are the statuses for each transaction kit. So on the screen that you were just in, up at the top, it defaults always to open status.
Yes.
I want to
That's
chat
a good idea.
about.
Yeah. So there's also the status up here. You can change that status based on the, let's say, what is going on with the transaction. If it is something that is withdrawn or something that didn't work out, you can change that to withdrawn or expired. But when you do have a firm deal, for any firm deals, please change the status to firm deal. Please select when ready to submit. Actually, there's one important aspect of this that I didn't cover today, which was the checklist. And maybe, Jane, if we have a couple minutes, I can just hop in here and show you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to go over the checklist. I will just mention also that Kevin Ali put out a YouTube tutorial as well on the checklist, which is short and sweet and really informative. But yeah, let's just do a review here just so that people have the complete overview of what this program does for them.
Yeah, perfect. And guys, anyone who's attending, don't worry too much about remembering this information. My goal today was to show you what's possible when it comes to doing any of the mechanics here. Like I mentioned at the start, we do have YouTube videos, we do have training documents, and you have your GM. So, you can access this information, YouTube and the training document 24/7. It's going to be up on the training channel on Workplace, and maybe we can individually email it to you if you request. But for the checklist, let's specifically discuss this. When it comes to firm deals and compliance and submitting documents, we're no longer accepting firm deals via email, okay? This is the system we're using from start to finish for all transactions. All firm deals have to be submitted through WEBForms. You have to go into the particular transaction and click on checklist on the right-hand side. If you don't see it, it's probably because the menu is closed. So click on this menu button and click on checklist, and it will bring you to this page. You want to individually upload these documents. So where it says working with a realtor, you only want to be uploading the working with a realtor file, okay? And the only files that we're mandatorily collecting are the ones that have this particular 7 days after offer date dialog here. So in this case, we're not collecting offer summary document mandatorily. You can, of course, submit it, but it's not required to get paid. There's also optional items like waivers. So if you have a lease that particularly had a clause or something that was waived, you would have to submit that waiver, okay? What you want to do is click attach and then drag and drop that particular PDF into the drag and drop folder section over here. So I'm just going to Click any random PDF so you guys get an idea of what this looks like. Drag and drop. It will upload and it will be submitted. Okay. I'm going to remove this from queue so admin doesn't get confused, but you guys get the idea about how to attach this. There is a particular bonus item that I could cover. I'm also going to add a YouTube video for this later today. It's called the slice tool. And Jane, would I have like 5 minutes to cover slice tool?
Sure, absolutely. Yep, if you guys can't stay on the webinar, again, this will be available, but yeah, it's best to cover it here if you can, no problem.
Great. Slice tool is a very particular use case. What happens when you send a transaction to the listing agent is they will send it back to you with all the forms signed as one big PDF. And the issue is when you have to submit these files for compliance, you need to remove them from that one big file and make them individual documents. So what you can do, hop into the transaction. On the right-hand side, click on Documents, then click on Add New Document. It's going to ask you to drag and drop the files here. Let me see what I can do here. I'm just going to use, okay, this one as an example. You can drag and drop the entire transaction here. You'll see the file is added as a PDF. Click on the menu button beside the file and click Slice Markup, and then Slice again. The system will load all of the PDF as you can see here, page by page. You can individually select documents like confirmation of co-op. So you just click those 2 pages, it will select them, and you go Save. And it'll pop the Save As menu up, and it will ask you for a name. So in this case, it's confirmation of co-op. This is just as an example, probably signed by both sides. So you just go Save, and it will remove those 2 pages. And let me just show you. You can see here confirmation of co-op as PDF. If I click on this, it's just going to be those 2 pages. And now you can submit this by going back to checklist. I know it's a little bit complicated, but you go back to checklist. And you can click attach, click select from documents, select the file, and click OK. There is also an option to submit directly from here, which is just click the submit button, send this document for review, but it doesn't let you choose what you want to select that document as. So like agreement to lease, for example. So that's really briefly the possibility of slicing up files. If you didn't catch anything I mentioned, don't worry. I will be having both the PDF manual walkthrough and the YouTube video explaining this process again.
Perfect. That's a great overview. That's a really useful tool. And we do have a couple of questions. So if you have questions, we'll take a couple of minutes to answer them. So first of all, Fatima is asking if we can duplicate transactions. So can we use this transaction for the same client on a different property? Or would you have to start from scratch?
I would start from scratch. My advice would be to go back to this dashboard and create transaction from scratch. When it comes to entering information for your clients, it's usually just name information that you're copying over. So starting from scratch is the recommended way of doing that. When you copy information from, let's say if you copy a transaction, it copies all of the previous address information as well. It's actually quite a messy process to copy over, which is why we recommend starting from scratch. Sorry, there was another question there as well, correct? So can we do all of this in Authentisign as well? Yes, we get that question all the time. Can we do all this stuff in Authentisign? We recommend using Authentisign as an extension of WEBForms, not as an individual product. We would like for you to create all transactions using web forms, because in that instance, managing and submitting the forms is also part of web forms. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a little bit hard to access web forms from the Toronto Real Estate Board homepage, but if you bookmark the URL pr.transactiondesk.com, once you've logged in, it's really easy to access this system.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, I think that answers the questions we had. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us after the webinar. Post your questions on training, reach out to your growth manager. One way or another, we'll get your questions answered. And thank you, Mahir, for joining me today. That was super informative. So I know I walked away with walking away with a couple of new tools. So that's great. Thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for coming.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.